I'm Becky Brower, and I'm a Sending Mom. You're listening to the Sending Mom podcast.
Welcome to the Sending Mom podcast. This is the bonus episode of the Sending Spotlight. Today I wanted to talk about Clara Schumann. She was the oldest surviving daughter of Friedrich and Marianne Wieck. She was born in 1819 in Leipzig, Germany, and her parents had a really turbulent marriage, and they divorced when Clara was only 4. Interestingly, Clara learned to play the piano from her mother before she even learned to speak at age 4. When she was 5, she was returned to her father, who was demanding and abusive. He was determined that Clara would be a child prodigy. From the time she was 5, she had 1-hour lessons daily and would practice many hours alone as well. She began performing and composing at the age of 9. Shortly after this, she was touring through Europe. It wasn't all bad, though. She recorded in her diary, "If I have known much trouble in my youth, I have also known much joy." Isn't that the truth? With trials, there is also joy. The trick is remembering to look for the joy. At age 16, she fell in love with Robert Schumann, who was a student of her father. Robert is a well-recognized composer in his own right, partly because of how Clara promoted his work after his death. Clara's father became angry and sent her to Dresden and ended his teaching with Robert to get rid of him. They continued to communicate by sending letters through friends. She was not allowed to marry Robert without her father's consent until she was 21. They decided to challenge the court on this, and it was really a difficult time for Clara. Her father tried to defame Robert and her in order to keep them apart and said some really nasty things about both of them. It was really heartbreaking for her. They did finally end up getting the court to rule in their favor, and they were married actually one day before her 21st birthday. Clara and Robert had 8 children together. She continued to compose, perform, and teach. Her oldest daughter, Marie, was a huge help to her and basically ran the household. Her younger sister, Eugenie, said, "Thanks to Marie, Clara could live entirely for her profession, untroubled by the onerous demands of everyday life, which were kept from her so as not to hinder her in the pursuit of her art. My mother fully repaid her devotion with tenderest love." The other help they had was with Johannes Brahms, a student of Robert's who played with the children and would often babysit them when Clara was touring. You might remember that Brahms wrote a famous lullaby that mothers hummed to their children before bed. Clara outlived her husband and 4 children. After they had been married for 4 years, Robert had a mental breakdown. They moved to Dresden to help him. By 1854, Robert attempted suicide by jumping into the Rhine River. He was rescued, and then he committed himself to an asylum. Clara was pregnant with their 8th child at the time. She was not allowed to see her husband until just a few days before his death in 1856, although she really missed him terribly. Clara composed 26 pieces as a child and young woman, 31 pieces as a married woman, but only 1 when she became a widow. She spent a lot of time during that time editing Robert's works and always performed her husband's works at her concerts. Her daughter, Julia, died in 1872, leaving 2 children. Then in 1879, her son Felix died at age 25, leaving his 2 children for her to care for as he was no longer married. Another son, Ferdinand, died in 1891. Her son Ludwig inherited his father's mental illness and went to an asylum. Her son Ludwig inherited his father's mental illness and went to an asylum for 30 years until he died. Clara performed her final concert in 1891 at the age of 72. She taught piano until her death in 1896. It's the tragedy of her life. She definitely found great joy. She once said, "Composing gives me great pleasure. There is nothing that surpasses the joy of creation, if only because through it one wins hours of self-forgetfulness when one lives in a world of sound." I want to focus a little bit today on creation. This doesn't necessarily mean composing a song, a poem, a work of art. You can create a beautiful room, a lovely garden, a good attitude in a child, a comfortable atmosphere. Finding the thing that makes you forget yourself is a place of peace. When I'm feeling down, one of the tools I use is creation. Creating means you are just bringing something to the world that was not there before. We all can contribute in our own unique way. Chrissy Sobey was my most recent guest on episode number 12. She quoted Shakespeare in the podcast. He said, "You alone are you." She went on to explain that only you can offer certain things to the world that no one else can. This does not make you better than anyone else because everyone has the ability to offer their unique self, but it does give you an opportunity to contribute your own unique abilities to the world. Helping your children to be more creative is a really important part of their development, and you can be a sending mom by helping them to be more curious and to be more creative. So I want to give you a few suggestions about helping your children to explore creativity. So first of all, encourage curiosity and exploration. So when your children ask questions, be sure to answer with questions. So like when your child asks something, just encourage them to think critically and ask them like, what do you think? Or how do you think we can find out? Instead of telling them the answer, you should express confidence and trust in them. Shutting a kid down discourages them from thinking on their own, and it also discourages them from talking to you. Also expose them to new experiences, like take them to the museum, to concerts, nature trails. These experiences can really inspire new ideas and interests. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast. It's really important to expose children to possibilities so they can choose their own creative outlet that will help them to contribute in their own unique way, as well as give them a peaceful place to feel fulfilled. The other thing is to be spontaneous. When my children were young, I would often take like a paper map, the old big paper maps. We just use our phones now, but go get a paper map. And I would have my children close their eyes and just point on the map. And we'd just drive to that place. And we had so many fun adventures that way. Lanny Adamson, who was on the podcast in episode number 10, she talked about going to lunch with her team and having them choose right or left when they'd get to an intersection. And I used to actually do that with my kids too. We'd get lost by flipping a coin for which direction we would go. So spontaneity really breeds creativity because there are so many possibilities. Okay, so the second thing to do with your kids is to provide open-ended materials. So stock your house with materials like art supplies, building blocks, dress-up clothes, and musical instruments. These things help them to have imaginative play without predetermined outcomes. Oh, and I'll put my recipe for Play-Doh on the Sending Mom website. I never buy Play-Doh because it's so cheap to make from ingredients you already have in your kitchen. Just get a bunch of cookie cutters and you've got yourself a great creative activity for your kids. All right, so third, support creative risk-taking. Teach your child that mistakes are a part of the process. Praise their effort and creativity rather than just the end result. I remember hearing about Sarah Blakely. She was the founder of Spanx, and her parents really encouraged her creativity. At the dinner table, Sarah's father would regularly ask her and her brother, "What did you fail at today?" Instead of focusing on accomplishments, he celebrated their failures. If they didn't have an answer, he'd express disappointment, not because they hadn't succeeded, but because they hadn't tried something new or taken a risk that could lead to failure. This practice reframed failure as a positive and valuable learning experience. It taught Sarah that failure wasn't something to fear or avoid, but rather an essential part of growth, creativity, and innovation. She credits this mindset with giving her the courage to pursue her entrepreneurial dreams and take risks, ultimately leading to the invention of Spanx. Do you guys have Spanx? They are the best. It's like a little girdle. I hope you've heard of them. Super Sendy, right? I love this story because teaching children to be resilient involves embracing failure. You're gonna be bad at something before you're gonna be good at it. If you quit because you're bad at it, you'll never find out how great you could be at it. So just give it time. Okay, so the fourth thing is to set aside unstructured time. Allow time for free play without screens or structured activities. This fosters independent thinking and problem solving. It's a little more work with young children, but it's part of your responsibility as a parent to teach them how to play. I kind of had a tough time doing this with my children because I'm sort of productive and I would be thinking about all the things I should be doing instead of playing. and then feeling guilty that I didn't want to play with my children because I knew that that was my priority and the most important thing. I finally decided I would just set a timer and play with my children for a set amount of time. And then I would do the other things that I felt were important. That helped my kids to understand that mom was present for them and playing during that time, and allowed me to go on and do the other important things I needed to do as well. I think it's important to show your children that there are other responsibilities besides just being with them. But of course, it's important to play with your children as well. Okay, so the next thing is to encourage storytelling. So read books together, encourage your child to create their own stories, use drawings, words, or even act them out as plays or puppet shows. So the next thing is to engage in creative activities together. And that's kind of what we talked about a little bit before, but some of the things you could do together would be to bake, to paint, to garden, build Legos, play music, modeling, so that children can see the value of all of these things. Be sure to ask open-ended questions, encourage imaginative thinking with things like, what if animals could talk? Or what would you invent if you could create anything? Okay, the next thing is kind of important, and we all know it. Limit screen time and structured activities. You need to give children space to explore and experiment on their own without the constant guidance of screens or scheduled lessons. This can be really good for you too. I had a friend who used to allow each of her kids to choose one sport and one music thing, and then church activities. If they don't have structured activities though, beware, because it's easier to let them be in front of the screen. So I found having limits on screens can be helpful. I also have a list of activities called Things to Do When You Are Bored, Can't Play Screens, and Need Something Fun to Do. ... If my kids are bored, I'll hand them the list to pick something to do. If they are really bored and don't want to do anything from the list, I'll start coming up with chores for them to do. That usually inspires them to find something to do. And I also like to tell them that it's actually good to be bored because it encourages their creativity. So next is to celebrate their unique ideas, display their artwork, listen to their made-up stories, and show genuine interest in their creative pursuits and even their not-so-funny jokes. Validation really boosts confidence and encourages further exploration. And last, encourage problem solving. Present challenges like building a bridge with only toothpicks and marshmallows, or designing a way to transport a toy across the room without touching the floor. These activities help develop creative thinking skills. I used to be involved in a program called Odyssey of the Mind. It is a great program that encourages kids to come up with creative ways to solve problems, a long-term problem and a spontaneous problem. I'll put a little more information about it on the Sending Mom website, so look into it. I'll also put my list of things to do when you're bored on my website, so be sure to look for that at Sending Mom. Really, whether it's creating art, music, oratory, books, muscles, a peaceful home, a friendship, an activity, it is the contribution of that creative pursuit that will give you purpose and meaning and help you feel really true joy. This is what being a Sendy mom is really all about. There are so many Sendy activities to involve yourself with. It's more fun with friends, so definitely invite a friend to be Sendy with you. Clara Schumann said, "There is nothing greater than the joy of composing something oneself and then listening to it." This isn't prideful. It is pure joy to take the things you do well and share them with the world. I would love to see what you do that lights you up. Please subscribe to sendymom.com to get all of the updates and news. Let me know what you contribute to the world and what brings you joy. That is being a Sendy mom. In the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, do something every day that scares you. I'm Becky Brower.